They said no wild horse would ever do that, not carry a child, not save one. But on a freezing Montana morning, a Mustang with ash-gray fur limped from an abandoned factory, an unconscious boy clinging to his back like a fallen angel. No one saw where they came from. No one could explain how they survived. But some say the horse remembered a promise. And some promises don't die, even when silence is the only voice left to speak. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. Billings, Montana. The kind of town where winter doesn't knock before it enters, it simply takes over. The early morning air bit through wool and skin alike, a bitter reminder that autumn had long packed its bags. Snow flurries drifted lazily under dull street lamps, swirling through the fog like secrets too tired to be kept. Most of the city still slept, all except for one man and one horse. Nash Rowley was parked outside an old convenience store on 6th, and Wabash, cradling a thermos of cheap black coffee and humming a Hank Williams tune off-key. In his late 40s, Nash had the rough, sun-battered look of a man who'd lived 2 lives first, as a firefighter, then as a delivery driver after a spinal injury ended his career. Broad-shouldered with shaggy brown hair tucked under a trucker cap and tired green eyes, Nash had grown to appreciate quiet mornings, even the cold ones. Especially the cold ones. But this morning, this one was different. From the fog, a shadow moved. Hooves echoed on wet asphalt, deliberate and slow. At first, Nash squinted, thinking it might be a stray horse from one of the outer ranches. But as the figure emerged under the dim orange streetlight, his breath caught in his throat. A wild Mustang, and strapped across its back, limp arms dangling, head bobbing with every step, was a child. Nash dropped his coffee. What in the name? The horse didn't startle. Its coat was a dull gray mottled with ash and soot. Its mane was tangled clumps of dried blood, and bramble stuck to its flanks. One eye was partially swollen shut. But what struck Nash most were the horse's movements, calm, measured, like it knew what it was doing. The boy on its back couldn't have been older than 9. Pale, barefoot lips tinged blue. His name wasn't known yet, but he would come to be called Asher Lane. Nash moved slowly, hands out. Hey, easy now. Good boy. I'm not gonna hurt you. The Mustang halted, nostrils flaring. It stared at Nash, no through him, with an intelligence that made the older man's skin prickle. And then gently, it lowered itself to its knees, allowing the child to slide to the curb with unexpected care. Nash reached forward, heart racing. He pressed 2 fingers to the boy's neck. Faint pulse. Barely there. He fumbled for his phone, called 911, and reported the impossible. Yeah. I need an ambulance. Right away. A horse just brought me a kid. No, I'm not drunk. When the ambulance arrived 5 minutes later, Dustfire, as Nash would later name the Mustang, refused to leave. The EMTs were cautious at first, but the horse stood still, flanks trembling, watching everything. When they placed Asher on the stretcher, Dustfire followed, hooves clacking behind them like a ghost that wouldn't be left behind. At Billings Medical Center, the emergency team worked fast. Asher was diagnosed with mild hypothermia dehydration and multiple bruises, including a gash above his temple. There were signs of prolonged stress, but no broken bones. The mystery of who he was, where he came from, only deepened. He had no ID, no shoes, no name, just the faded symbol of a half-sun behind his right ear, tattooed faint, but unmistakable. Dustfire stood in the hallway of the ER, still as stone, refusing every attempt to move him. That's when Dr. Willa Hartman entered the scene. Willa was 38, tall and lean, with short auburn hair, always pinned back in a messy bun. She walked with the sure-footedness of someone used to emergencies. Her dark eyes were observant, often too sharp for comfort. Once a veterinarian for military working animals overseas, She'd returned to Montana after her brother's death to work in pediatric trauma. But animals, especially ones like Dustfire, never stopped calling to her. She approached the horse slowly, speaking low. "You've seen things, haven't you?" she murmured. Dustfire shifted the muscle along his flank, twitching. Willa crouched, eyes scanning the strange collar around his neck, made of heavy-duty military nylon-reinforced seams and a small, almost invisible metal plate near the buckle. Not ranch gear. Government issue. And the emblem etched into the side, a half-sun cradling an open eye. Willa stood heart-pounding. She'd seen that before. Once. In a classified folder buried deep in her father's file cabinet marked Equinox Project. Inside Asher's room, the boy stirred. Nurses whispered. The child hadn't opened his eyes, hadn't made a sound. But his fingers curled almost imperceptibly every time Dustfire stepped closer to his bed. Later, Nash filled out a witness report with the local police. That horse, he told the officer, he didn't act like a wild animal. He acted like a soldier. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the city in another soft white coat. But within the hospital walls, the fog hadn't lifted. It had only deepened, wrapping itself around the boy with no past, and the horse with eyes full of memory. By nightfall, Willa had convinced the hospital board to let Dustfire remain in the observation wing under her supervision. She moved a spare veterinary mat into the room and placed it at the foot of Asher's bed. Dustfire settled there without hesitation, his body curled protectively, his nose barely touching the boy's hand. And for the first time since being found, Asher's lips moved. One breath, one word. Dust. The Mustang flicked his ear like he had been listening the whole time. Morning came with a haze that clung to the windows of Billings Medical Center, like smoke from a forgotten fire. The snow had paused, but the sky stayed heavy, muted gray, like a held breath. Inside room 212, the light was dim, filtered through curtains no one had opened since the boy arrived. Asher Lane lay still beneath the blankets, his face turned toward the wall, his eyes half-lidded, not quite alert, but not unconscious either. Dr. Willa Hartman stood at the foot of the bed, arms folded observing. It had been nearly 12 hours since the rescue. The boy hadn't spoken again, not even when nurses prodded gently, not even when asked his name. He responded only to one thing, the Mustang. Whenever Dustfire stirred, tail-twitching hooves shifting, Asher's breathing would deepen, or his fingers would curl just slightly, as though following a rhythm only he and the horse could hear. Willa leaned down and brushed her fingers along the thick collar around Dustfire's neck. It wasn't like any tack she'd seen before, not even in the military. The woven nylon was reinforced, scuffed and scorched in places. As she undid the buckle, something small and sharp clinked against her nail. Beneath a fold of lining nearly invisible was a chip, a sleek black capsule the size of a grain of rice, embedded with surgical precision. She plucked it free and held it to the light. Etched across the metal was a symbol faint but unmistakable. A sun split in two, each half pulling away from the other. Her pulse quickened. That symbol had haunted her childhood. She'd once found it on a confidential folder in her father's office, long before his military clearance had been revoked. She hadn't understood it then. But now, she knew where she needed to go. An hour later, Willa stood in front of a cluttered storefront on the corner of Locust and Madison. A flickering neon sign buzzed above her Mercer Mods and Repairs. The windows were layered with dusty motherboards, a cracked microwave, and a paper sign that read, "Open probably." Inside the shop was a technophile's fever, dream tangles of wire-humming 3D printers, and shelves filled with gadgets that had died and come back changed. Behind a desk built out of recycled arcade cabinets sat Finn Mercer, 36, lean and wiry, with a mop of curly dark hair and a permanent scowl softened only by curiosity. He wore fingerless gloves, thick-rimmed glasses, and a zip-up hoodie that said, Error 404, life not found. Finn looked up from his soldering iron and snorted. Wow, I thought you forgot I existed. I did, Willa said dryly, stepping over a box of tangled extension cords. But then this happened. She handed him the chip. Finn's fingers were careful, reverent, even as he turned it in the light. This isn't retail. Looks like military-grade biometric storage. You can decrypt it. He scoffed. You brought me a forbidden snack. Of course I can. While Finn booted up his workstation, Willa wandered the shop, staring at the half-finished robots and broken gadgets, wondering how much of Finn's madness was real and how much was armor. They had history, brief, messy, unfinished. Years ago, she had saved his dog after an accident. Later, he helped her decode encrypted messages sent between her father and an unnamed military contact. It was a friendship built on quiet gratitude and shared ghosts. Finn plugged the chip into a reader and typed furiously. It's encrypted. Of course it is. AES 512. Might as well be NASA's diary. Willa sat beside him, exhaling slowly. The symbol on it. You recognize it. He paused. The sun. Split sun, she corrected. My father called it Project Equinox. Finn blinked. The trauma bonding program for kids and animals. Thought that got shut down a decade ago. Not shut down, Willa said. Buried. The monitor blinked. Lines of code scrolled, then froze. A folder appeared. E-Unit. A271 Lane. Finn opened it. Inside was a name. Asher Ellison Lane. Date of birth. Medical history. Classification subject, type B, paired with equine unit dust fire. Notes followed short lines with chilling implications. Shows increased neural response in presence of unit. Responds to touch only after equine contact established. Separation trauma extreme. Sibling pairing terminated. See Alara file. Finn leaned back, eyes wide. He's not just a rescued kid, he was part of it. And Alara, Willa asked softly. Finn typed again, fingers jittery. Another file surfaced. E-Unit, A272, Alara Lane. No last known location. Flagged subject MIA following facility breach and fire. Presumed deceased. Maybe Finn muttered. But you know what they say about presumed. Willa was silent, her thoughts racing. He has a twin. As if summoned, her phone buzzed. A text from the hospital. Asher, awake, still mute. Drawing. They drove back in silence. Inside the pediatric wing, Asher sat cross-legged on the bed, a sketch pad balanced on his knees. Dustfire lay beside him, muzzle resting gently against the bed frame. A nurse stood nearby, unsure whether to smile or cry. Willa crouched near the foot of the bed. Can I see what you drew? Asher didn't speak, but he turned the pad slowly. On the page was a drawing in graphite. Stark, haunting. A metal door half buried in dirt, wrapped in vines. Above it, a symbol of the split sun. And below it, a horse shackled at the hooves, eyes wide with fear. Finn swallowed hard behind her. That's not just art. It's a memory, Willa whispered. He was there. She turned to Asher. Was Alara there, too? Asher's eyes flicked toward Dustfire. The horse blinked once, then thumped his tail against the wall like a code only the boy could read. Asher's fingers moved again this time, tracing a second door on the page. A twin image, a path not yet walked. The next morning broke cold and quiet. Fog drifted across the Montana plains, like spilled milk curling through the bare tree limbs and old fence lines on the outskirts of Billings. The frost had returned overnight, coating the windshield of Willa's Jeep in a filmy glaze, and the sky above Canyon Ferry Lake glowed dull and white, a canvas of ghost light. Dustfire stood alert beside the vehicle. Nostrils, flaring ears forward. The map from Asher's drawing, paired with coordinates extracted from the chip, had led them here to the ruins of a derelict farmstead, tucked between weather-bent hills and brittle birch trees. Once part of a ranching cooperative, it had been sold off decades ago. Now it lay forgotten. But for Asher, it was familiar. The boy sat silently in the back seat, sketch pad on his lap. He hadn't spoken since the single word in the hospital, but his eyes flicked to the fence posts, to the stone silo slumped on one side, to the gutted barn swallowed in vines. Memory stirred there, though he couldn't explain why. Willa turned off the engine. She had dressed in her old field gear cargo jacket boots, a pistol holstered discreetly beneath her coat. Finn Mercer climbed out from the passenger side, groaning against the cold, a flashlight clipped to his belt and a tablet stuffed in his jacket pocket. His hoodie was layered under a military surplus parka, and a GoPro blinked on his shoulder. "You sure about this?" he asked, eyeing the landscape. "No," Willa said. "But we're here." Dustfire trotted ahead, hooves crunching against frozen gravel. The Mustang moved with intent, pausing once to sniff a rusted swing set, before veering toward the barn. Asher followed without hesitation, his hand resting lightly against Dustfire's side, as if tethered by something unseen. The barn loomed like a skeletal beast. Its roof collapsed, the doors crooked on their hinges. Dustfire halted near the far corner, beneath a wall of tangled ivy and dead brush. He pawed at the ground, once then again, digging until frost cracked and crumbled. Finn crouched beside him and yanked back the vines. "Well, would you look at that?" A metal hatch lay beneath the mud and leaves, round, reinforced, and barely visible, like it had been sealed with the intent never to be found. Willa ran her gloved fingers along the edge. Weld lines. This wasn't farmer's work. It was military. She looked at Asher. "Is this the place?" The boy nodded once. They opened the hatch, with a loud groan of protest, rust tearing like old cloth. The air that escaped was cold and stale, tinged with earth and something metallic. A narrow ladder descended into the dark. Willa went first. The basement reeked of mildew and age. Fluorescent fixtures dangled from the ceiling, long dead. The walls were concrete, the floor cracked and littered with old clipboards, broken crates, and crates labeled in blocky text, "Property of Deptoners, 87. In the far corner, a sliding steel door was wedged open by a toppled filing cabinet. Dustfire snorted softly, then nudged it aside with his head. Beyond was a chamber smaller than the rest, dimly lit by a shaft of sunlight trickling through a busted vent. In the middle of the room, wrapped in a ratty blanket and surrounded by empty cans, was a girl. She blinked against the light shielding her face. She couldn't have been older than 10. Thin, her skin pale and stretched tight across her cheekbones. Her hair was knotted and uneven, and her eyes sunken, wild, locked instantly onto Dustfire. The horse stepped forward slowly. She didn't flinch. Instead, she whispered, "You came back." Lark, that was the name she gave when Willa asked gently. She spoke in a whispery rasp, like her voice hadn't been used in weeks. She said she had stayed behind after the fire hiding when the men with no names came to take the others. She had survived on canned beans and condensation. And hope. Lark believed she had been chosen. Her memories were fragmented but vivid. The Equinox Project, she said, had promised them they were special, marked by light. But things changed. The instructors grew harsher. Tests were conducted in silence. Names were taken. Some kids were renamed. Others disappeared. Alara was the last one they took, Lark said. She was crying when they dragged her up. She kept asking for someone. A boy. She turned to Asher. "You." Asher's hands clenched tightly at his sides, his eyes never leaving hers. Finn scanned the room with his tablet, noting the infrastructure. This was a research wing, not a shelter. Definitely not a ranch basement. Dustfire wandered to a corner of the chamber and snorted, drawing Willa's attention. Among the dust and broken files lay a strip of cloth, partially buried beneath rubble. She picked it up. Muddy torn, but faintly visible on the inside. Hem was embroidery Ellison. She looked at Asher. "Your mother's name," he nodded. Lark wouldn't leave the basement right away. The light hurt her eyes. She flinched at the open hatch, but she followed Dustfire step by step out into the cold. She allowed only him near. It was the smell, she said. He reminded her of before, of safety. Later, as the sun sank behind the pines, Willa contacted Sheriff Cole Benton on a satellite phone. She kept her voice low as she explained what they'd found. Children, secrecy, a hidden project beneath farmland. Cole didn't say much, but she could hear the tension in his breath. "Send me coordinates," he said. "I'm coming." That night, back in Billings, Lark slept in the back seat, wrapped in a thermal blanket curled beside Dustfire, who had wedged himself in as though he belonged there. Asher watched from the front seat, head leaning against the window, silent but alert. In Willa's notebook, she wrote 4 words. They were never lost. The wind had shifted by the time they returned to Billings. It no longer whispered through the streets. It pressed in heavy and close, as if the city itself had overheard too much. The fog was thinner now, traded for a dry chill that cracked the pavement and stiffened fingers. Willa drove with both hands gripping the wheel tighter than she needed, to her mind running faster than the tires below them. In the back seat, Lark leaned against Dustfire, her small frame nearly swallowed by the thermal blanket wrapped around her. She hadn't spoken since leaving the underground chamber, but her eyes had adjusted. Asher sat beside her, silent as always, but his eyes no longer held confusion. They burned with quiet recognition. Willa pulled into the back lot of the temporary shelter she'd secured through a contact at a local trauma center. The building, once a community college annex, now served as an interim housing unit for displaced youth. Dustfire trotted alongside them, calm but alert. Inside, the air was warm, buzzing with the sound of space heaters and quiet conversation. Willa barely had time to unclip her coat when a knock sounded at the front entrance. The staffer on duty, a slim, pale woman named Harper Lynn, barely 30 bomb, and already a quiet leader among caseworkers, peeked through the blinds. Her face paled. "There's someone here to see you," she said, her voice a whisper. Willa crossed the lobby and looked out. A black SUV idled at the curb. Stepping from the passenger side was a man in a dark overcoat, flanked by 2 assistants in matching attire. He walked with deliberate calm, every step measured like punctuation. Pastor Damian Creed was in his late 50s, with silver-streaked black hair and a voice that had once captivated thousands. Tall and lean with bone-white skin and coal-black eyes, he exuded a cultivated warmth that never quite touched his mouth. He extended a gloved hand toward Willa. "Dr. Hartman," he said, voice syrupy smooth. "We meet at last." Willa didn't take his hand. "Why are you here?" Creed smiled. "The child you're harboring, Asher Lane. He belongs to us." Behind him, one of the men produced a folded document, a legal-looking packet stamped with a judge's insignia. Willa skimmed it. Mental instability, spiritual deviation, reassignment custody granted to the Bright Order. Creed nodded as if delivering scripture. "He's unwell, doctor. Our foundation is designed to help children like him find alignment." "He's not unstable," Willa snapped. "He's traumatized, and he doesn't belong to anyone." At that moment, the front doors opened again. Sheriff Boone McCready stepped inside, wide-shouldered and solemn. A veteran of 2 tours, now nearing 50, Boone had the type of presence that silenced rooms not by force, but by gravity. His brown eyes held the weight of someone who had seen too much and learned to live with it. He adjusted his badge and crossed to Willa's side. "Everything all right here?" he asked. Creed offered another smile. "Sheriff, this is a civil matter." "Then let's handle it." "Civilly," Boone replied. He took the papers, read them carefully. "I see your judge's order. Doesn't mean I'm handing over a kid to an unlicensed religious facility. We're federally exempt," Creed said smoothly. "And this is my county." Boone returned. "If you want to take him, you'll wait for a full psychological evaluation and an independent hearing. Until then, the boy stays." Creed's smile faltered. "You're obstructing the will of the court." "I'm protecting a child," Boone said. Creed stepped back. "You've been warned." He returned to the SUV and the doors shut with soft finality. Willa exhaled slowly. "Thanks," she said. Boone didn't look at her. "You've stirred something deep, Doc. We need to move fast." That night, as the shelter settled into silence, Dustfire grew restless. He paced, ears flicking hooves, striking the linoleum softly. Then, without warning, he pushed open the stall gate in the makeshift stable out back and trotted into the dark. Willa was alerted by the staff, and within minutes, she and Asher followed Dustfire's tracks. Lark refused to stay behind, clinging to Asher's sleeve. Boone joined them, driving his county-issued SUV toward the outskirts of town. The tracker embedded in Dustfire's old collar still pinged, only now it showed movement, heading west toward the Little Belt Mountains. As they drove, Willa couldn't keep her hand steady. Her thoughts drifted back to the night her father had returned from D.C. Face gray uniform stripped of rank. He'd tried to explain words like classified intervention, equine therapy gone rogue ethical breach. She hadn't understood then. But she did now. He had tried to stop this, and it had cost him everything. Finn stayed back at the shelter to monitor their movement and provide technical backup. But within an hour, his screen blinked with an alert, unauthorized breach attempt. Internal IP flagged. He cursed and shut down the main system, rerouting through a secured drive, only to realize it wasn't the government. It was the Bright Order. Their digital roots weren't just in theology. They ran through ex-military networks, old research labs, and wiped servers. In the mountains, Dustfire finally stopped near a clearing. Before them lay a forgotten trailhead partially buried beneath snow and moss. A hand-painted sign once read, "Camp Silvershore," now cracked in two. Willa stepped down from the SUV, the cold slicing through her coat. "We're not alone," Boone muttered, eyeing the surrounding trees. Suddenly, Asher walked forward, pulling Lark with him. Dustfire followed. Without hesitation, they turned down the path. No fear, just certainty. And behind them quietly, Willa and Boone followed too. The trail through the Little Belt Mountains narrowed into silence as they approached the old monastery. Branches bowed low under the weight of the wind, and the moon was a ghost behind thin cloud. Dustfire led the way, hooves pressing careful tracks through pine needles and damp moss. He didn't hesitate. He never did when it mattered. Hidden behind a thick curtain of cedar trees and a crumbling wall of stacked stone, the structure emerged, a once grand religious retreat with tall towers and broken stained glass. The monastery's western wing had collapsed years ago, but the eastern end still stood hollowed and eerie. A rusted plaque near the entrance read, "Sanctuary of the Radiant Sun," half buried beneath soil and ivy. Willa scanned the perimeter with a cold knot in her stomach. Boone McCready stood beside her, shotgun slung low and flashlight clipped to his vest. Behind them, Asher and Lark waited, each gripping a small pack. Dustfire pawed at the earth beside an old drainage tunnel just wide enough for a person to crawl through. They didn't need to speak. The Mustang knew the way in. They moved in single file, Boone first, then Asher and Lark Willa bringing up the rear. The tunnel echoed with the sound of their breathing and the soft clang of Boone's boots against stone. Cobwebs brushed their shoulders, and the air was stale with mildew and dust. After 20 feet, the tunnel opened into a maintenance chamber, lit by faint moonlight leaking through a grate overhead. From there, they followed a corridor marked by symbols, burned into the concrete. A split sun, identical to the one etched on Dustfire's old collar. They passed abandoned offices, cracked mirrors, and a makeshift dormitory. The silence was thick until they reached a heavy door at the end of the hall. It was locked. Boone pressed his shoulder against the wood and listened. Behind it, movement. Faint but unmistakable. Alara, Asher whispered. There was no reply. But Dustfire stepped forward, snorted once, and pressed his muzzle against the door. Boone drew a crowbar from his belt and forced the latch. The door gave way with a jolt. Inside, a girl no older than 9 huddled against the far wall. Her hair was tangled, eyes wide with shock, and her sweater bore the unmistakable symbol of the broken sun. The room smelled of mold and cold iron. Willa stepped in, slowly lowering herself to one knee. "Ilara, my name is Willa. We've come to take you home." The girl didn't answer. But when Asher entered, she lifted her head and something changed. She blinked once, then again. Recognition flickered like a spark catching dry wood. "Ilara," Asher said again, voice shaking. "It's me." She stumbled to her feet and ran into his arms. Neither cried. But something wordless passed between them, something only siblings know. Behind them, footsteps. Willa spun just as Damian Creed stepped into the hallway, flanked by 2 men in dark coats. He looked unchanged, cold, composed, a smile playing on his lips, like a mask that had learned to breathe. "You've gone too far, Doctor," he said, voice low and even. Boone raised his shotgun, not one step closer. Creed raised his hands, almost amused. "She belongs here. No one belongs in a cage," Willa snapped. "And your time is up." Creed glanced at Dustfire, then sneered. "The animals always react, don't they?" "Instinctual. Predictable." Dustfire moved first. With a roar of hooves, the Mustang surged forward, slamming his front legs into the stone between Creed and Boone. The shock sent one of Creed's men staggering backward. Boone took the opportunity. A sharp order, and the second man hit the floor, disarmed and dazed. Creed tried to flee, but footsteps echoed from the main chapel. Flashlights, radio chatter. Federal agents summoned through Willa's covert report, and Finn's encrypted file dump swept in. Creed was forced to the ground, hands bound, face pressed against the cold floor. Outside, as dawn crept over the horizon, Ilara clung to Dustfire's mane. Asher held her other hand. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Dustfire stood still between them, head lowered, flanks, heaving the light of morning, painting his fur silver. A month later, on the outskirts of Billings, Sunhaven Ranch officially opened. Nestled among golden fields and sheltered by a ring of pine, the ranch was equal parts sanctuary and recovery center. Children arrived quietly, each carrying their own ghosts. Some came from broken systems, others from silence too long endured. Dustfire became legend there, a silent guardian who watched over the barn with calm eyes and gentle breath. He didn't need commands. He simply knew. Inside the ranch house, Willa finalized her guardianship of Asher and Ilara. The court process had been swift. With Boone's testimony, the federal agent's reports, and the data recovered by Finn, the truth of the Equinox Project and the Bright Order unraveled quickly. Lark stayed at Sunhaven too slowly, finding her voice again. She started helping with the younger children, feeding the horses, organizing brushes by color. Boone stopped by every week, though he never stayed long. The kids started calling him Uncle B. He never corrected them. As for Finn, he remained at his shop, but his walls were now decorated with photos from the ranch. Every time he fixed a broken console or rewired an old laptop, he did so knowing exactly who it might help next. One afternoon, under a sky streaked with gold, Asher and Ilara unrolled a wide canvas across the wooden fence near the training corral. Together, they painted a rising sun. Beneath it stood a gray horse. Eyes, steady body, strong, flanked by 2 children, whose hands touched at the center of his mane. At the bottom, in careful handwriting, they painted Guardian of Light. Dustfire stood behind them, watching quietly, as if he understood every stroke. Sometimes the ones who save us don't speak our language. They walk beside us in silence. They wait when we run. They remind us that even in the darkest places, light can find its way back. This story wasn't just about a wild horse or 2 lost children. It was about loyalty, about second chances, about the quiet power of being seen, believed in, and protected, especially when the world has given up. In daily life, we pass by people carrying invisible wounds. We rush past those who just need someone to notice. But if a Mustang can fight to protect a child, maybe we can fight to be more kind, to listen better, to reach out when it's easier to walk away. If this story moved, you share it with someone who still believes in quiet miracles. Leave a comment if you've ever been rescued by love in its purest form. And don't forget to subscribe to hear more stories that remind us how strong the human heart and spirit can be. Healing is real, and sometimes it comes with hooves.